What were you doing?" The boy's name was Kelvin. He was 13 years old, thin as a shadow with cracked lips and hands rough from sleeping on cold streets. He had not eaten since the day before. He spent most nights behind the hospital dumpsters because the walls blocked the wind. Sometimes nurses gave him bread. Sometimes they chased him away. That day the rain was heavy. Kelvin stood near the hospital doors, soaking wet, shaking. He wasn't begging. He never did. He just watched people go in and out, warm and clean, holding things he had never owned. Inside one bright room, doctors stood in silence. A baby lay on a hospital bed. David Hansen, 8 months old, tubes everywhere, machines breathing for him. His chest barely moved. The lead doctor looked at the monitor for a long time. Then he slowly removed his gloves. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Time of death, the sound of crying filled the room. David's father, a billionaire known all over the world, fell to his knees. His expensive suit meant nothing now. He had already buried his wife months earlier. She had died after childbirth, and now the last piece of her was slipping away from him. His hands trembled as he pressed his face to the floor, unable to breathe. One nurse reached to turn off the machines. That was when Kelvin stepped inside. No one noticed him at first, but Kelvin noticed something everyone else missed. The baby's mouth twitched. Kelvin's heart slammed hard in his chest. "He's not gone," Kelvin said. The room went still. "Get him out," someone snapped. The nurse reached for the machine. "No," Kelvin shouted. Before anyone could stop him, Kelvin ran forward, grabbed the baby, and pulled the tubes away. Alarms screamed. Doctors yelled. Security rushed in. Kelvin didn't think. He just ran straight to the sink. He held David the way his mother once held his little sister before she died. He tilted the baby forward and let water run over his mouth. Not fast, not rough, just enough. "In the name of Jesus," Kelvin whispered, his voice breaking. "Breathe." Seconds felt like hours, then a cough. Water spilled, another cough. A thin, weak cry filled the room. Everyone froze. The baby they said was dead was alive. Chaos filled the hospital. Doctors rushed forward. Nurses shouted orders. Security grabbed Kelvin's arms, but the baby was crying, crying. The sound no one thought they would ever hear again. "Wait," the lead doctor said slowly. They checked the monitors. Oxygen levels were rising, heartbeat steady. Weak but real, impossible. They took David back to the bed. Machines restarted, tubes replaced. But this time David fought them. His tiny fingers moved. Kelvin stood shaking in the corner, arms wrapped around himself. His clothes dripped water onto the floor. No one knew what to do with him. Samuel Hansen walked toward the boy. Up close, Kelvin looked even younger, dirt under his nails, old scars on his arms, fear in his eyes. "You saved my son," Samuel said, voice breaking. "I just didn't want him to die," Kelvin whispered. Doctors pulled Samuel aside. They spoke in quiet voices. "What the boy did shouldn't work. There's no medical explanation." But the child responded. They ran scans again. David's brain activity had changed. Not healed, but waking. The doctors had no words. Kelvin sat alone in a chair, stomach growling. A nurse brought him food. He ate slowly, like it might disappear if he rushed. Later that night, Samuel returned. "Where's your family?" he asked gently. Kelvin looked down. "My mom died, my sister too," he said. "I ran away after." Samuel swallowed hard. "You can't go back outside tonight," he said. "Please stay." For the first time in years, Kelvin slept in a clean bed. The news spread fast. Doctors called David a miracle. He may never walk. He may never talk, but he's alive. And Kelvin stayed. Every day Kelvin sat by David's bed. He talked to him, sang soft songs his mother once sang, told him about the stars and how the night sky looked when you had nowhere to sleep. David responded. A finger curl, an eye opening, a soft sound. Doctors watched in silence. One nurse whispered, "He responds more to the boy than to us." Samuel watched too. This homeless boy had done what his money couldn't. One night David's oxygen dropped again. Doctors rushed in. Kelvin stood frozen. Then David's tiny hand closed around Kelvin's finger. The numbers slowly rose. The doctor stared at the monitor. "He stabilizes when the boy is near," she said. No one argued. Months passed. David learned to swallow on his own, then to sit, then to laugh. Doctors called it unexplained recovery. Samuel called it grace. Kelvin no longer slept behind dumpsters. He went to school. He had clean clothes, food every day. One afternoon, Samuel sat beside him. "You didn't just save my son," he said, "you saved me." He adopted Kelvin that year, not because of the miracle but because Kelvin had already lived through enough pain to know how to protect life when it was fragile. Years later, David would walk, and when people asked how he survived, Samuel would say, "A boy the world gave up on refused to give up on my son." Years passed quietly. Miracles rarely stayed loud. Kelvin grew into the Hanson house the way sunlight fills a room, not all at once but slowly, until one day you realize the darkness is gone. He struggled at school at first. Reading came hard, trust came harder. He flinched at raised voices, slept with the light on, hoarded food under his bed for months. Even though the kitchen was always full, Samuel never scolded him. He understood hunger. Now David grew strong in small victories. A step, a word, a laugh that echoed through the halls. Doctors continued to visit, continued to shake their heads. They had no explanation. They stopped trying to find one. They simply called Kelvin the constant. The world outside didn't forget. Journalists wanted interviews. Churches called Kelvin a sign. Some doctors questioned the story. Others resented it. Online debates raged. Science versus faith. Chance versus divine intervention. Samuel shielded Kelvin from it all. "You don't owe the world your pain," he told him, "but pain has a way of resurfacing." When Kelvin turned 17, he froze one afternoon at a crosswalk. Rain fell suddenly, heavy and cold. The smell of wet concrete dragged him back to dumpsters, to hunger, to shaking hands. His breath hitched, his vision blurred. David, now 6, noticed first. "Kelvin," he said softly, reaching for his hand. Kelvin dropped to his knees. It was David who knelt with him, David who pressed his forehead to Kelvin's. David who whispered words he had once been whispered himself. "Breathe," David said. "Please breathe." And Kelvin did. That night Kelvin finally told Samuel everything he had never said. The guilt of surviving, the fear of being sent away, the weight of being called a miracle when he still felt broken. Samuel listened. Then he said something Kelvin would never forget. "You didn't save David because you were special," Samuel said. "You saved him because you knew what it meant to be invisible. You acted when others had already decided the story was over." Years later, Kelvin became a pediatric nurse. Not famous, not celebrated. He worked night shifts, sat with frightened parents, talked to children who couldn't sleep, held hands during moments when machines were louder than hope. Sometimes when doctors turned away too quickly, Kelvin stayed. And sometimes a child breathed again. When David grew up, he asked Kelvin once, "Do you think I'd still be here if you hadn't walked into that room?" Kelvin smiled gently. "I think," he said, "that love walked in with me, and somewhere quietly, without headlines or cameras, the world healed just a little more."